Affordable Wide Field Astronomy with Brian Ventrudo on episode 483 of the Actual Astronomy Podcast. I'm Chris, and joining me is Shane. We are amateur astronomers who love looking up at the night sky, and this podcast is for anyone who enjoys going out under the stars. So, just before we get going, Shane, I think we had more than a few new Patreon supporters. Hang?
Yeah, it was kind of a busy week for that. So big thanks to Leonid, Matt, Joseph, and Ernest. And as always, thanks to all of our Patreon supporters. Excuse me. I think we're probably around that 100 mark. So yeah, big thanks to everybody.
Yeah, thanks so much, folks. It helps keep the show going, and bit of a surprise here in the middle of spring since we really hadn't been doing too much of a call out for it because, yeah, just kind of the cadence of the year. But yeah, we certainly appreciate this sort of surprise support from listeners. So today we have a returning guest star, maybe I should say. Though it's been a while, Brian Ventrudo is the author of Cosmic Pursuits, which is a webpage focused on astronomy and observing the night sky. And he is a contributing editor for Sky and Telescope magazine, which I personally have a subscription to, and I always enjoy seeing your articles in, Brian. Brian has a PhD in laser spectroscopy and helped measure the fingerprints of molecules found in interstellar space and planetary atmospheres. Welcome back to the show, Brian.
Chris, it is great to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you. So maybe we'll just catch up on a few things first. I think it was in December 2023 that we last had you on, and we talked about some of your observing articles in Sky and Telescope at that time. But how has your recent observing been? I know you had planned a trip to grasslands recently, but understand maybe that didn't get off the ground due to weather or other events.
Yeah, I was hoping to get to grasslands in early May, but some stuff came up and I couldn't get away. So the weather was good here, and so I observed from the backyard, which isn't quite the same,
Hmm.
but that's all right. And then yeah, since I last talked to you guys, I've been doing a lot of the trying to learn the dark art of astrophotography. Kind of got
Oh
into
yeah.
it a few years ago, and then got into it more and more, and now I'm sort of branching away from that a bit. I was stuck out maybe a few weeks ago trying to take some photos. It was a beautiful night, and the stars were great and the sky was dark, and I realized I'm looking at a computer screen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's something wrong with this. I think I'm going to haul out the eyepieces again. So that's what I've been doing for the last month or so.
Awesome. Cool. And it sounds like maybe you've purchased a new piece of equipment, although a slight divergent path from our topic of the day.
Yeah, I've been listening to your gear articles recently, especially you had kind of I think you were picking your best equipment by elimination in a recent podcast, and another one about gear talk. I think that was episode 476, and I thought, I know if I listen to these, I know I'm going to end up spending money, and sure enough, I so
Yeah,
yeah. On the recommendation of Shane and the internets, I picked up a Takahashi FOA 60Q, which is on its
Hmm.
way next week. Perfect for my recent rekindled interest in double stars and carbon stars and solar system objects, backyard stuff. So we'll see.
Mm,
We'll see how that performs.
yeah, it's a
nice.
it's a wonderful scope for that use case. It's fairly light. As the reviews on the internet indicate, it probably is as close to optical perfection as you can get, and it's just a joy to use because of the quality. And 60 millimeters to me is almost ideal for backyard light polluted observing. Larger aperture doesn't buy you a lot with light polluted skies, and I think you and I both have the Nexus digital setting circles, which also really kind of amplify the backyard observing. It just makes it a lot easier under bright skies.
Yeah, we do. That was another one of your brilliant suggestions, Shane. I mean, I love those things. You
Yeah,
know, I, it would be almost impossible to do serious visual astronomy from the city without those. So they are a must-have for sure.
yeah. I am 100% in agreement.
I really like the 60 millimeter size scope because it gives enough resolution and detail on the planets And then as well, mine's f6, which I can use a tele extender in, but typically I'm just using an f6, and then you can still get some decent wide fields with it. I think with the FOA is still just 570 something millimeters. Maybe I've got that wrong, but it's not like a hugely long focal length such that you can use a nice 2-inch eyepiece in it and get some still wonderful wide fields, hey?
Yeah, I think it's 530, so f8.8
Okay.
without the extender. So yeah, I mean, pop a 24 millimeter in there, or we'll see what it looks like with even a 35 millimeter panoptic, and see what we
Oh,
can see.
wow.
Yeah, I haven't used mine without the Q extender in it yet. Part of the reason is the rings that I have are, I think they're the K Aztec rings. So, like, you need an Allen wrench to separate them, and they're not hinged. So it's kind of a pain to actually like take the Q extender out. So I'm thinking of maybe getting one of the Takahashi clamps because that's just like way more conducive to removing the Q extender and observing it with its native focal length.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes. I got the clamshell, so we'll see how that works out. But even with that, I mean, this is not like popping in a Barlow lens, right? You got to unthread a piece of the telescope, so it does take some time and planning. But
Yeah,
there's bigger problems to solve, I guess.
that's right.
Cool. What you need, Shane, is some of those nice red Prima Luce rings.
Don't get me started on
Takahashi, I don't know. I don't know.
Cool. Cool.
I love the
Um,
hospital. I love the hospital green hardware on those
I
telescopes.
do too.
yeah.
I think it's appealing.
Yeah, very retro.
Hmm.
So we're going to chat a little bit about some wide field instruments because Brian, you had written a note to us about making a sort of poor man's, if you will, version of the Teleview NP127 and had mentioned a few things about that being a dream scope for you. So maybe I'll just let you tell us, why you personally feel the TV NP127 is a dream scope and some of your other thoughts around it.
Yeah, this was inspired again by one of your recent podcasts, 476, I think. Someone wrote in and said a friend of theirs had a 6-inch f5 objective. I don't know if it's one of those old Jaeger's objectives, but I thought, wow, that would be great to build a telescope around that. A nice achromat, wide field, good for deep sky. You know what I'm talking about. And I thought, yeah, I wish I had one of those lenses. And then I realized, wait a sec, I do have a lens like that. It's actually in a telescope down in my basement. I've got an Orion ST120, which is an achromatic 120 millimeter telescope with an f5 focal ratio. And I've used it before. It's great for deep sky. And the chromatic aberration is, it's not good. It's not good, I have to admit. So all bright stars look purple, which is kind of
Mhm.
cool, but it's not what you want. But for faint things, for deep sky things, that's fantastic. And that's the kind of telescope I've always gravitated to for dark sky. And the the NP101 from Teleview and the NP127, so the 4 and the 5-inch, are kind of aspirational telescopes for me because they give you that. They give you a big aperture. So in the case of the 127, you got a 5-inch scope that I think works at f5.2. So you get a
Yes.
nice big field of view, with all the Teleview eyepieces, long focal length Naglers or my 35 millimeter panoptic, a couple of ethoses. It would just be beautiful. And the reviews are fantastic. The chromatic aberration is well controlled. Most importantly, the field is flat across the full field of view of these eyepieces. So the view of, extended nebulae and star fields is supposed to be fantastic.
Hmm.
So one day, but not today. And these are interesting telescopes, these NPs. The NP stands, if I remember right, for Nagler Petzval. So the ways these things are designed, they've got I think a 2-element ED objective that works at f11, if I'm not mistaken. So the long focal ratio helps keep the chromatic aberration low. There
Hmm.
is an element in it, I think. But then back in the tube are two more optical elements that act as a field flattener and a focal reducer. So it
Hmm.
takes that f11 down to f5.2. So you've got the benefits, the chromatic aberration benefits of an f11 5-inch objective in a much shorter tube that gives you
Hmm.
a flat field. Now, of course, that makes them expensive to make. They're hard to align. You don't
Yes.
want to jostle them around, but if you take care of them, they're beautiful instruments.
Mhm.
I
I
went
had a
down a similar. Oh, go ahead, Shane.
Oh, okay. I was just going to say that I had a Teleview Genesis SDF, so a little bit of an
Oh,
older, like the predecessor to the
yeah, yeah.
101 NP, and it was a wonderful scope. It worked so well, and the fields were, yeah, as you described, quite flat, quite wide. It was a heavy telescope. It was, with the extra elements, and I think just the Teleview sort of bomb proofing of their gear added to the weight. But yeah, it was a wonderful telescope to use. I only got rid of it when I was able to find a Takahashi TSA 102. But I kind of
Right.
miss the Genesis from time to time because it was so
Yeah, the
nice.
wide field is nice. I have looked for those on Astromart. They're hard to find in Canada. You see them, or sorry, on Astrobicel.
Mm,
Hard to find in Canada. You see them in Astromart sometimes, but
hmm
Yeah, I would really like to get one as well. I think I'd like to get, but if I get one, the very first version, it's slightly faster, slightly wider field of view, but I think the elements are slightly less correcting for chromatic aberration, which doesn't matter to me as much. But having looked through, Shane's Genesis, having looked through other uh, NP 101s, and then this is probably about, well, the version before the NP, there was another version of it. I really wanted to get something like the NP 127 as well, but like you, Brian, or maybe I'm making an assumption, but I didn't have the funds to support the purchase because it is a fairly expensive telescope. Not that the work hasn't gone into to make it worth that, but I ended up getting a, Borg with Pentax lenses, and that's 125 mil f6. That's exactly how I ended up with that scope because I really wanted to have something as sort of as close to this instrument as possible, and in my mind anyway. The reason why a telescope in sort of this 120 or 5-inch size range is so nice is that you get a lot of light grasp and then as well lots of resolution. So you can look at planets up to like 250 magnification. It's still small enough that your seeing isn't hugely impacted. It's still small enough that they're going to cool really fast, but big enough they pull in lots of light and still short and fast enough that you're going to be able to have some exceptionally wide fields, which is where these instruments really excel at. You can look at all kinds of huge, stretching objects like the Veil Nebula or the Andromeda Galaxy or the North American Nebula, or even like something like the Belt of Orion can fit in the field of view of these instruments with a nice 2-inch eyepiece. Like you were saying, the Panoptic 35 mil has, I think, at least a 3-degree field of view in these instruments, if not more. So it's really opens up almost like a whole new sky. I feel like they're instruments unto themselves, sitting partway between binoculars and your more traditional telescopes, but with the ability to look at planets as well. But you went a slightly different direction than I did. My telescope costs about halfway in between what the MP127 costs and what you went with. And what you went with is kind of the direction I was going in before I got a good deal on a pre-order for my 5-inch. So maybe you just want to tell us a little bit more about the instrument you chose and how you configured it on the cheap.
yeah, sure. Yeah, those Borgs are nice. I don't think they're on the market anymore, are they? Those.
They are, and they're gonna release another 125 mil at 6.4, I think f6.4. So mine's f6. They made
Okay.
it a long time ago in 6.4, and that's what they're re-releasing it as with Fujinon lenses versus mine has the Pentax lenses.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I saw on a video from Neef. last month, 2025, that there is a new 125 millimeter board coming out.
Mhm.
But yeah, I guess like both of you, I mean, I like having nice telescopes and optics, but I don't like spending money. Is, a constant tension. So yeah, when I remembered I had that relatively unused ST120 in the basement, I pulled it up and looked through it, and yeah, sure enough, the chromatic aberration is not so good. So I mean, I can minimize that by using a fringe killer or something like that, one of these Botter filters, to get rid of
And
that blue fringes when looking at the moon or planets.
And these telescopes they're basically a 120 millimeter aperture with a focal ratio of f5, meaning they're about 600 millimeters in focal length. And they're made by a variety of or they're sold by a variety of companies. I think yours may be an Orion, and I know Skywatcher still, has one available, I believe. I think there's been another few companies out there that have sold these sort of 4.7 f5s in the past, and they can go for very affordable prices used. Hey, I think I've seen them into the $300-400 range. I think if I'm
Yeah,
recalling correctly.
absolutely,
So
absolutely. I got mine just before Orion discontinued them, and then of course the market discontinued Orion shortly after that.
sadly, yes,
Yeah,
sadly, yeah.
yeah. So I think the telescope itself was maybe 300 US
Hmm.
new, and that comes with nothing. So you've got to find a finder for it. I had to buy some
Yeah.
ring. Focuser was really bad, so I got a GSO dual speed focuser from Agena, Astro Products. And then, I had a reasonable telescope for wide field sweeping. Now,
Hmm.
the weakness, so I mean, I mentioned the fringe killer and the chromatic aberration. I have other telescopes for planets, so I've got a longer 102 millimeter refractor I can use for planets and so forth. This ST120 is strictly for deep sky, and it
Hmm.
works. It works okay for deep sky. You do notice some field curvature. So with
Hmm.
such a curved lens, field with such a fast lens, field's curvature is a problem.
And how does that look when you look in the instrument? What does field curvature look like?
A field curvature. If you bring something to focus at the center of the field of view with an eyepiece, the outer edge of the field of view, 20, 30% of it will be out of focus. If you bring that into focus, then the center of the field will be out of view. It's because the objective projects a focused image onto a curved surface, not a plane. So it starts to creep up in the 24 millimeter panoptic, for example. Not a big deal. I mean, I'm not an optical perfection fetishist necessarily, but it was distracting. And
Hmm.
certainly with the 35 millimeter panoptic, it really gets objectionable.
Hmm.
And with a 13 millimeter ethos, which is an eyepiece that costs 2 or 3 times as much as a telescope, uh,
Hmm.
it is also noticeable.
Hmm.
So again,
And it's
inspired
and
by
it's not a problem with the eyepieces. I think we should
yes,
yeah, the eyepieces are perfect. It's just inherent in having a very fast doublet refractor. Doesn't matter the make model. Anybody can make it. It's just going to be subject to these laws of physics, eh?
that's exactly it. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good point. I mean, I think a 2 inch eyepiece from a telescope I bought years ago. It came with the telescope kind of thing, kind of $50 2 inch Plössl probably, and I popped that in this, and it was the field curvature was really bad.
Hmm.
So these premium eyepieces, again from Teleview, but there's many others, of course, try to
Hmm.
correct for that or compensate for it, but
Hmm.
it was too much in this telescope. So I popped on the internet looking around, and I honestly don't know how I got on this thread, but some people were using a field flattener with this telescope to help correct for the field curvature. And
Hmm.
generally, that's not something you use for visual observing. There's field flatteners for astrophotography because you want everything to be in focus on your flat sensor.
But typically, I think with those photographic field flatteners, they change the focal point or where the optics are actually bringing the light to a point of focus. And then I think that that's a problem for visual because typically you can't get your diagonal or eyepiece in there at that spot because it's either, too far up the tube or 3 feet behind the telescope or something like that, if I'm recalling correctly.
Yeah, that's
I think,
exactly it. That's
yeah.
exactly it. Yeah. So if you have a telescope that has, say, from the edge of the focuser to the focal point, take your diagonal out and everything, it might have a working distance of, I don't know, 100 millimeters, 120 millimeters.
Hmm.
You pop a field flattener in there or a focal reducer, it tends to reduce the back focus to, the typical number is 55 millimeters because that's the kind of the distance from the back of the lens to the film plane of an SLR camera.
Oh, okay.
So that's kind of the standard back focus, and there's no way that gives you enough room for a diagonal in the eye. And
No.
yeah, works great for photography though. But
So,
anyway, yeah.
yeah, what did you go with? Because you went with a special one that really isn't designed for photographic, almost designed more for visual.
Well, they claim it's designed for photographic, but I
Oh,
found a
okay.
thread on cloudy nights that had a flattener called the TS Flat 2 from TS Optics in Germany. It might be sold under other names too, but it has a
Hmm.
huge back focus. I forget, like 120, 140 millimeters or something.
Yes. Yeah,
So
something like that.
that for someone for astrophotography, that gives you a lot of room to put in things like filter wheels and so forth, or whatever you want.
Hmm.
But it's also enough to accommodate a diagonal and an eyepiece. So people swear it works with the ST120 and other short focal ratio refractors if you get the working distance right within a few millimeters.
Yes. Yes.
So for this telescope, people had tried out this flattener by taking for example, a William Optics 2-inch diagonal and
Hmm.
unthreading the nose piece of it, and that exposes a female M42 thread, which perfectly adapts to the TS. You can just thread the TS flat 2 into the
Hmm.
diagonal, slide it in your telescope, and you should get a flatter field. So that was the gist of it.
Nice.
Now, for shorter focal length telescopes, you need a slightly larger working distance, so you might need a
Hmm.
spacer between the diagonal and the
Yes.
flattener. Some diagonals don't have like my Teleview diagonal, for example, doesn't have a removable nose piece.
Hmm.
Some Botter diagonals do, but they're kind of a pain to remove. So I did have a William Optics 2-inch, and it worked quite well.
Oh,
Anyway,
nice.
so I slid it in the telescope and gave it a try, and sure enough, it works reasonably well. So, where the field of view was getting kind of gnarly around 30% to like 70% to the edge, or the outer 30% of the field was almost unusable in a 35 millimeter panoptic.
Hmm.
It tightened up considerably, so it was pretty impressive.
I also have one of these.
Oh,
I
you
was
have
going
that
to ask you,
flattener?
Chris. I thought you did. Yeah.
Yeah, I bought one, and then so my idea was to use it in the little Borg F 50 millimeter F5 Shane that you'd help put together with
Hmm.
me. And sadly, though, with that instrument, and like you were talking about, Brian, with yours, you can thread it onto the diagonal, and it works very well with a 5 inch. Because mine was only 50 millimeters, or just like basically a fraction of the size of your instrument, I needed to extend it out almost beyond the objective lens in order for it to work. So it worked a little bit, but I couldn't really get it into that sweet spot. So what I was really curious to hear about with your experiment with this larger instrument was how you actually determined where that sweet spot was and how much improvement that you saw. So that's cool.
Yeah. Well, on the TS Optics product page for this flattener, they do have the working distance for various focal lengths, so you can take that as a starting point. I mean, I
Hmm.
cheated and looked at the back of the book on cloudy nights, and they told me what the working distance was and that it would work with this flattener with this diagonal. But I will try it too. I've got an AT72, an Astrotech 72 ED, and I think with a short extender, it should work on that telescope too. So
Hmm.
we'll see. So I mean, this
Nice.
kind of opens up the field for lower cost refractors to be made into reasonably effective deep field or deep sky instruments.
Hmm. Hmm. Nice. And you mentioned having some filters as well. I also, because I have the very large 7-inch Acromat, which seems to have a reasonably flat field. I think it's long enough at over 1,000 millimeter focal length that it doesn't end up being impacted too much by field curvature. But the secondary color is certainly there, and I just went and bought the absolute cheapest chromatic aberration correction filter in the 2-inch size from Civ Boni or SV Boni or however you want to say it. I think it was like $49 or something. And it reduces like the chromatic aberration by about 80% or something. So I've been pretty happy just to basically get a 80% of a 7-inch apochromatic telescope for about 1/20th the price or
Yeah.
something like that. So there's some method to my madness in your logic as well, Brian. I'm right here with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, chromatic aberration must be a bit of a challenge with a 7-inch telescope because, it's a problem that does increase with aperture.
Hmm.
But yeah, 1/20th the price. So, I mean, all in, I probably put in $1,000 to the ST 120 and
Right.
maybe a little more in Canadian dollars. And I think an NP 127 is close to 10,000. So,
Yeah. Yeah,
and
exactly.
does it give me equal views? Not quite, because the chromatic aberration is still there, the figuring of the objective, so the stars aren't probably as tight as a much better telescope,
Hmm.
but, it looks pretty good.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, what I love about this conversation too, like I think most of the time, Chris, you and I on this podcast talk a lot about, appos and because that's what we use a lot. But like there's so much value in acromats and they are really, really good performing instruments. Some of them maybe require a little bit of action or modification, like a TS flat 2 or something like that. But if you even get a longer focal length achromat, they can be quite outstanding. My little Zeiss telemeter is wonderful. It's not a wide field instrument, but it really performs well. And it's too bad that acromats get such a bad rap within the astronomy community because I think people are kind of missing out a little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah, I agree.
exactly.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, it's the kind of guys we read when we were kids, probably like Scott Houston and even Leslie Peltier. They used wide field, rich field telescopes. They called them back.
Yeah.
They used to drool over those, and they were all acromats, and they would work probably not much better than my $300 base model ST 120. Right. So there's a lot to be had out there. There's even
And
yeah. Go ahead.
I don't want to cut you off, Brian, but I did want to echo what Shane said. And then as well, um, as I was working on my observatory, my builder was, um, we did have a listener who wrote, I think they just maybe wrote me or wrote us, and I responded because I felt so passionate about it. But I think they made light. They weren't being critical or anything, but they made a little bit of fun of us for being so maybe new scope focused or apochromatically minded. And I wrote them back and I said, well, actually, I'm building a giant observatory for a huge third hand achromat. And it has a third hand mount that's in there. Like most of my equipment is either something that somebody gave to me, like the hand controller was had a challenge, and Alistair gave me a hand controller, and I was able to get a couple other bits and pieces from here and there, and the big components are third hand and achromatic, and I certainly don't regret that. There's an awful lot you can do with some very minor tweaking, especially now with these filters. So I was really curious, Brian, what filters are you using with this 5-inch Acromat that you've
I haven't
brought up
bothered. I
to
haven't
near
bothered.
Petzval standards?
Yeah, my two element Petzval. Um, well, I guess it's got more with the flattener. There you go. But yeah, as far as filters to get rid of chromatic aberration, I haven't bothered
Oh,
because
okay.
if I want to look at planets or the moon, I've got a longer 102 millimeter, as I mentioned. So filter wise, I've only used light pollution filters with it,
Hmm.
nebula filters. So I mean, it's absolutely spectacular on things like the North American Nebula and Pelican Nebula. the Veil Nebula. I mean, I saw the California Nebula with it, with an H.
Hmm.
So, you know, that's not bad for a telescope that is between $500 and $1,000, depending on what you put in it. Now, I know a lot of people. There's other threads on cloudy nights, particularly about another TS Optics instrument. I think it's a 6-inch f5.9 refractor. I think you and I had a
Oh,
couple
yes.
emails back and forth on this, Chris.
Yeah.
And this is a very interesting instrument. It's it won't work for me because it's probably too heavy for my little Stellar View M2C mount, and I
Hmm.
don't want another mount. But I think it weighs maybe all in 25 pounds with rings and so forth. This telescope,
Yeah.
and people are doing all kinds of experimenting with different filters to get it to work on planets. And again, you know,
Hmm.
they have an ED version of that costs, I don't know, 5,000-6,000 euros maybe,
Hmm.
whereas this one I think runs maybe about 1,000 euros. So with a little study, you can get quite a bit out of this. What filters are you using? And let me say, as a side point here, you mentioned your achromat. When I found out you were equipping your observatory with an achromatic telescope, I was a little surprised. I said, Chris Beckett's using an achromat? What the
Yeah. So yeah, the filter is just SV Boney makes it's called a like a fringe type killer or an achromat correction filter or something like that. But
heck? Okay.
it was super cheap. It was $49, I think, American, and at the
Okay.
time with the exchange, it was not even $70 Canadian with the shipping. I got it through like Amazon too. So, and I just kind of got it just to see because there was a listener who wrote and said, you know, you should try this for your Acromat. It works. He was very surprised at how well it works. The price on it is like the stock market, though. It's all over the place. Sometimes it's like $120 and sometimes it's $49. So I just kind of watched it for a period of months, and then when it was at a low, I sort of picked it up. Buy low, sell high. I should just be buying 10 of them a month or something. Um, but anyway, so I've been using that. And then one of the other things that I think that people forget with acromats, and of course every instrument is different. It depends on the quality and the figure of the lenses, which on the one that I have are particularly well ground and polished, is that the more magnification you put on a target, in particular, when we're looking at planets, we're usually going to be using more higher powers, right? Like, I mean, that's
Yeah.
just the nature of planetary observing. And what happens to the secondary color, the chromatic aberration, at those higher powers visually, like the visual appearance of it, ends up getting spread out. So it becomes less obvious. Now, I know that it's still taking away from, you know, the crispness of the image quality, and I know that you're losing some of that light because that's light from the planet that's getting spread out. But in the design of these instruments, being achromatic isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world or in the universe in this case, and that is that these instruments are designed to focus much of the light that our human eyes are able to see at night anyway. So that,
Yeah.
yes, we're losing some, but it's light that our eye is less able to do much with. Would a 7-inch apochromatic instrument see more with my eye pressed to it? Absolutely. How much am I getting with this instrument with the $49 Symphony filter and the telescope cranked up to 308 power on the moon? Well, I'm probably seeing about 80 or 90 or maybe 98% was our estimate the other night when we were looking at Theophilus or one of those craters, and the resolution we were getting was better than any instrument any of us had ever looked through before. So it really becomes hair splitting, and I think with your instrument as well. And I have an 80 millimeter f5 I've set up. It's just more like a kick around instrument I bought during the pandemic for $80. It
Yeah.
had a
This is the short tube 80. It's
Yeah,
kind of
the
the
short.
little brother of the ST120. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. And I haven't used the TS flat in it too much yet, but I put the same focuser from GSO that you put on yours. beautiful little focuser, and just a great little wide field instrument to have. I just have it in a quick grab bag, and if I need a little fast telescope to put outside the observatory to see something that the telescope can't reach because of the 6 foot walls, which don't obstruct too much of the sky, but you can't see within 5 degrees of the horizon in most directions. So, having that handy and in there is great. But I'm going to say this, and I'm not sure if you found this yet, but when we're observing nebulae, in particular like the Veil or the North American or what have you, a lot of the time we're using filters like a O3 or a UHC, or like if you're looking at a Barnard's loop, for example, that goes around the outside of Orion, it's an H beta. You put that H beta filter in, and when it comes to the outer field and some of that field curvature, maybe that's left over when you're using the TS flat, or maybe if you don't have a TS flat or want to go through that experimentation, if you use a good nebula filter, the way that it dims the stars down while at the same time increasing the contrast with the nebulae, it enables us to reduce the visibility of any of the optical imperfections while still allowing the nebula in that to come through. So you end up with, really a view that's way more similar for your $1,000 instrument versus the $10,000 instrument. I think side by side, if you had them, you'd say, "Oh, that MP127 is definitely where it's at." But you get up into that 80 or 90% performance rating. You're going to pay a lot to really get that last 20% or so.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So, of course, nebula filter for visual use tend to pass blue and green light where our eyes are sensitive. They may also pass red light, H
Mhm.
alpha at 656 nanometers, but we can't see that very well. So that kind of helps remove the chromatic aberration problem if you're only passing
Mhm.
20, 30 millimeters of light around H beta and O3 for sure.
Mhm.
Like when I learned a little bit of optical design back in university, but I worked with lasers, which are purely monochromatic. And so when we got to the part of the textbook that was about chromatic aberration, they said, you don't need to know this stuff, right?
Yeah.
So when I started to look through telescopes again, I thought, oh, this is kind of a pain. Um, what
I
was I
like
going to
your
say?
approach of having the specific instrument for the specific job. You have your wide field instrument, and then when it comes to planets, you're like, okay, then this other instrument is my planetary instrument. And I like that, because if the moon is up and it's like a quarter moon or more or whatever, I mean, and the planets are up, that's kind of what you're observing that night anyway, typically, right? So
Yeah, yeah,
that works
exactly.
well.
Exactly. Come to think of it, I've actually done some imaging with this ST122 with an H alpha filter, like a tight band H alpha filter.
Nice.
And I think it's about 7 millimeters wide. So it's only passing the 656. Taking pictures of the North American Nebula or Orion, and again, it's that makes the light monochromatic, and it makes chromatic aberration irrelevant with this El Cheapo telescope.
Cool.
So
One
yeah,
thing I want to talk about is the objects that we like to observe with wide field instruments. And maybe I'll just kind of quickly loop back to Shane, just simply because Shane, you've recently put together your 90 millimeter f 5.6 here in the past year or so. And in my mind, that's just such a beautiful, almost ultimate portable, small, wide field instrument. And you have a different approach, though, because I know you like the 1.25 inch eyepieces, and I just wondered if maybe you had a few objects or how you like to observe with that you might be able to join in with.
Yeah, I prefer the 1.25 just because with that particular telescope, it's super lightweight. And I feel like I'm working against one of its benefits by putting a 2 inch diagonal and a 31 millimeter Nagler on the end of it because it's super out of balance and all of that stuff. So I know I'm kind of missing out on some of its full capabilities, although I'll still put a 30 millimeter UFF in there occasionally and enjoy the real wide field views. But some of the areas that I really enjoy are up by Cassiopeia. I'm losing the constant. Oh, Perseus up there as well. There's so many great wide field things to look at. Even having the double cluster fully framed and
Hmm.
almost a small part of the field of view is an incredible
Yeah,
view.
yeah.
Malot 20, in the fall time frame is beautiful up there. And really, like, a lot of open clusters is where the wide field telescope starts to sing for me anyway. Even the Pleiades, is just absolutely incredible through the wide field. So I look at a lot of that type of stuff when I have the 90 millimeter out.
What
And even the 1.25, like 24 pan optic does great with all of those objects.
And it
what
gives over a
telescope is
3 degree.
this? What
Oh, go ahead.
telescope is this, Shane? This 90
Oh
millimeter?
yeah, sorry. It's a Borg 90 millimeter FL. So
Mhm.
I think it's like f5.6. Does
Yep.
that sound right, Chris? Yeah.
Yep.
And it's a really good telescope. I really enjoy it, and it weighs like next to nothing. Without without an eyepiece, but rings, diagonal, dovetail. I think it's maybe a hair over 2 pounds. Like, there's really nothing there. It defies logic.
Yeah, yeah. It's an Acromet,
No, it's Apo.
an ED. Yeah.
Yeah, and, well, fluorite in there.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah,
But yeah, that gives over a 3 degree field of view as well, which is kind of where you start talking about these very wide field, low power instruments. But with the Borg, the great thing with the Borgs are Brian. I don't know if how familiar are with them,
No, I've
but
never had one, never looked through one.
they're they're sort of addictive because you can buy some components and carry them between the various instruments. So I've bought a bunch of the mini components from Shane, and then I had to buy one or two other little components from Japan, and then I could go and buy a whole different objective and actually have two different mini telescopes. I have a 54 Achromat as my finder scope on the 7 inch, and then I have a 50 millimeter Achromat f5, which is like my ultimate wide field instrument. And I can just, have so many of these little parts. And then if I want to get a 60 millimeter, I can just buy that and thread that on and take out an adapter. So, you can get a whole new telescope. I think I paid $199 for that other achromatic lens, and you can just keep cobbling together these different instruments out of them. It's a whole lot of fun, but can be very pricey once you get into it.
yeah. You probably saw me grab the 90 mil. It's not going to fit in the frame very well, but like, it's not
Oh, yeah.
too much bigger than my water bottle, and yeah, pretty light. It's a fun instrument.
That is impressive. I mean, I've got my Teleview 85 behind me, and I hadn't used that for a while, and I picked it up. It's pretty hefty, I mean, that's a good thing. It's a robust instrument, but
Yeah, that's the
as
beauty
I
of the televiews. Like, they can take a knocking. Like, that
Yeah.
will definitely last a lifetime.
yeah, but I mean, as I get older, I find my telescopes are getting both smaller and lighter too. So
Yeah, yeah.
I
So what are
actually
you looking at, Brian? What are your main objects of interest for this 120 millimeter f5 that you've modified to be a slightly better wide field performer?
Yeah, the pickings are a little slim in spring. There's some bright galaxies to check out, but I've had this telescope maybe 4 years, even though it was a little bit unloved in the basement. So in past summers, you know, I agree with Shane. Like good fields with star clusters in them is nice.
Mhm.
The double cluster is one of my favorites for sure. But in the summer, just sweeping the star fields and the star clouds from the snout of Sagittarius, or from what I can see in Scorpius, like starting at M6 and M7, and just working my way
Mhm.
northwards, on little groups of stars, star clouds, as E. Barnard used to call them. And it's just fantastic. I mean, I've been looking at this stuff with instruments of varying quality since I was, 9 years old. And it's still like when I look at these things through a wide field instrument, I just think, wow, like that is just incredible. So, I mean, some particular favorites, for example, would be uh, the small Sagittarius star cloud. So that's M24
Mhm.
Sagittarius. It's got a couple of little dark nebula in it. And with this instrument, I mean, I can even spot I can't remember if it's in Barnard 92 or 93, these little nebula, but there's a star
They're
smack.
both in there,
Yeah,
I think.
they're both in there, but one of them have a star in the middle of it. I think a 12 magnitude star, so I can just make that out in good sky. And then the two nebula, the Eagle Nebula and the Swan Nebula, and the single field is nice.
Hmm.
The Lagoon Nebula and the Trifid Nebula. I mean, it with associated clusters in there also. It's
Hmm.
just fantastic. But
Yeah.
certainly, I think my favorite view would be the North American Nebula, because it's you've got a nebula, got another nebula, the Pelican,
Yeah.
and then just off the coast of Alaska of the North American Nebula is a small star cloud. So it's a
Hmm.
spectacular field of view, with a panoptic in there. I look forward to checking that out in the with this field flattener setup. I'm not sure what my field of view would be. 600.
And then there's always like the Sword of Orion in the winter,
Mhm.
which if anybody is familiar with seeing the Orion Nebula, there's some clusters and nearby stars that form that sword pattern. This is all just below the belt, and once you get into instruments like this, you can fit that whole sword, not just the Orion Nebula. You can fit in NGC 1981, and then there's some other NGC objects above and below those, and some other stars. And then there's some like sort of external nebula you can see in beautiful wide field photos. But in these sort of instruments, you can start to pick up some of those really huge nebulae that are out there because these instruments provide just the exceptionally super huge field of view that more traditional instruments just aren't able to grasp for the only fault that they have such a long focal length.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I just did a quick calculation. So I'm getting a 4-degree field of view. So that does
Wow.
fit the Orion Nebula in there. And with a nebula filter, it is spectacular for sure.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
You're seeing a whole ecosystem in there with dark clouds and nebula, brand new stars in the trapezium cluster, plus slightly older star clusters. It's all part of one of the Orion OB1
Mhm.
associations. I mean, that is the galaxy doing its work in that nebula. It's fantastic.
This
And
week I was oh
yeah, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to jump in because this week or yesterday in particular, I was just reading because this is like the antithesis of aperture fever we're talking about is having sort of these smaller, very wide field instruments from 60 millimeters up to sort of into the 5-inch range. And one of the things to think about is that you can kind of only go so far, and now people like Mel Bartels and some other folks that are building these 30 inch monster instruments that are very specialized and customized represent sort of the top end of the amateur range, but really one doesn't want to go much above those because your field of view ends up being so small, sort of extending out. The example I was reading was about the 100-inch telescope on Mount Wilson, sort of perhaps some amateurs' ultimate dream might be to own like this huge 100-inch type of instrument. But the challenges are that once you get much beyond sort of these 25 to 30 inch or so instruments, is that your lowest magnification increases significantly. So what we're talking about with these instruments are, I mean, shoot, with my little 50 millimeter, I think it's 7 magnification, and with my 7-inch, my lowest power is 27 magnification. With an 8-inch, typically you're in the 30s. And then that goes on and on and on. But once you get up to a 100-inch or a 60-inch instrument, you're into the hundreds of powers as your lowest power. And if you point a telescope that's operating at over 100 or so magnification you're starting to get down to just seeing a small portion of even maybe the Orion Nebula, because like with the 100-inch on Mount Wilson, I think the widest field, and the source I was reading said that the field of view in that is only 6 arc minutes. And if we think about the size of the double cluster, the Andromeda galaxy, or all these great objects that we all think about or love looking at astrophotos of, these are all like, 3 degrees or 2 degrees or 4 degree objects. And you really need these sort of smaller amateur instruments to really see those. And then, of course, there's objects you can look at with these much larger instruments, but you're seeing just a small portion of them. And I mean, gee, I imagine some of these planetary nebulae I've been observing would look fantastic through a 100-inch instrument, but it starts to become extremely specialized for objects that are very small in extent. Hey,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm sure that's a planetary nebula killer, that telescope.
yeah,
And aside from if you've got an observatory, that's great. But if you got to put up and tear down these telescopes when you go to dark sky, like
yeah,
that can become the telescope you don't use very much. The opposite of
exactly,
a small instrument. I
exactly.
saw a couple of years ago when I was in Chile. I looked at some guy had a 24-inch Dobsonian set up, and I looked at the Omega Centauri cluster with an Ethos eyepiece, and it was so spectacular. You just wanted to reach out and you wanted to reach into
Hmm.
the telescope and grab it. It looked so real. But, that's a big instrument.
Yeah. Exactly. And the other thing is with these larger instruments is um, they are often more impacted by seeing, depending on the location and the powers employed, such that sometimes the smaller instruments can give an apparent better view of an object or target simply because you're able to use like lower powers, like if you're only able to get to, like, using our extreme example, 400 magnification. Well, here at my site, the nights where I can get 400 magnification are pretty few and far between, as I imagine they are for many listeners. But with these instruments, I mean, you can go out on pretty much the crummiest night of the year as long as it's clear enough to see, and you can almost always use 8 power or 27x, or something really low.
Wow.
You
Yeah.
just have a lot more nights.
Yeah. Yeah.
The
Exactly. So,
the best boat that you'll ever experience is the one your buddy owns. And I think it's the same with large aperture telescopes, because then you don't have to deal with all the headaches associated with it.
Yes. Yeah. I suspect swimming pools are probably like that too. Backyard swimming pools. But yeah.
exactly. Exactly. Cool. All right. So, what other topics do we wish to cover before we conclude today, folks?
Well, I mean, what does this mean? I guess for someone starting out, there are, especially on the used market, a lot of low cost options. For
Hmm.
people to buy these sorts of things. Like this ST-120 is just one example of many. If someone wanted to get started in some of this, uh, they could start with an achromatic telescope, like a short tube 80 or something. But
Hmm.
there's probably better options too. They could pick up an 80 millimeter ED telescope. So an apochromat or something. You can buy a new one for $450 US, and there's tons on the used market. Like that's a pretty good place to start if
Yeah.
someone was interested in wide fields. I used to suggest, an 8-inch Dobsonian for someone just getting into it, and that's still not a bad bet. But people get tired of 8-inch Dobsonians. They're
Yeah.
even they are hard to drag around, especially if you're a bit older or you got an apartment. So
Hmm.
these small acromats or semi-acromats, ED refractors are, they're wonderful instruments that give you a nice, beautiful wide field like we've been talking about. Everything we've talked
Hmm.
about here, these wide field views you can get with a three, four, $500 telescope and some accessories, of course.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I like that suggestion a lot, Brian. Both checking out the used market because there is a lot of value there. And I'm similar in that I used to recommend 8-inch Dobbs all of the time, but I'm starting to think that a smaller, like 80 millimeter class refractor is a better way to go because it is a lot more portable. You can use it during the daytime as a spotting scope if you want, and it really shows you so much of the sky. Yeah, you won't quite get the galaxy detail of an 8-inch Dob, but it will do great on anything in the solar system and show you an awful lot of all of the Messier objects very well, and you're not going to regret that decision getting a 3-inch refractor.
Yeah, I think so, and it also gives a path, and many people to a little bit of astrophotography if you want. You can't take a picture, not easily at least, through an 8-inch Dobsonian. But with an ED refractor and a not terribly expensive equatorial mount, or even an alt-azimuth mount, you can do what some people call electronically assisted astronomy, EAA, so kind of snapshot astrophotography. And you would be amazed what you can see. Like with my 85 millimeter teleview, I can get images of 16th magnitude galaxies in a few minutes. Like, it's pretty cool. And again, this is a telescope that's just a couple of feet long or less, right? So they're very versatile that way. And if someone wanted to do serious astrophotography, they could do that too with a lot of 80 millimeter refractors. Maybe not an achromat, but an ED refractor for sure. And I mean, if someone could afford it and had a little extra, if their mount could support it, even a 102 millimeter ED refractor can be got for well under $1,000. And at 102 millimeters, refractors start to show, they start to get pretty respectable for visual observing, especially in dark sky. But an 80 is fine too.
Good stuff. Well, Brian, thanks for joining us today. How can people find you? I know you are an editor for Sky and Telescope. If people want to read your awesome articles in there, I cannot recommend getting a subscription to Sky and Telescope strongly enough. I'm been a subscriber, for the past 6 years and pretty regular purchaser off the shelf before that. So I know we can find you in there, but how else can people sort of find or follow you?
Yeah, my last article for Sky and Telescope was on winter reflection nebula, and I think I still have bits of frostbite from observing for that article winters ago. It was a really bad idea.
Yeah.
So I write about astronomy once in a while on my main website, cosmicpursuits.com. So that if you sign up for that, you get a monthly newsletter about what's up in the sky and maybe a feature article on something interesting in astronomy. And I'll write 1 or 2 articles a year for Sky and Telescope. And otherwise, I'm an astro hermit. But that's how you can find me.
Awesome. Very good. Shane, anything to add?
No, thanks, Brian. Enjoyed the conversation as always. And, hopefully we all have a good summer of observing, smoke-free and lots of clear skies.
So far, so good. Yes, let's hope so. Great to talk to you guys again.
Thanks again, Brian. And for our listeners, please subscribe, share the show with other stargazers you know. Send us your show ideas, observations, and questions to actualastronomy@gmail.com.
Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the show. If you are interested in more information, would like to contact us, or if you would like to support the podcast, check out our website, actualastronomy.com.